Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Welcome to another episode of the Middle Ground Podcast. Here we go. Inshallah, we have a good one for you today. We got one on how to conform.
How to conform
I figured,
or not conform.
It's too much effort. Too much effort to. Yeah, man. Let's just do on conformity. I like that a little bit better, man. If it's going to be all about how to not conform, ain't nobody got time for that. Who's the lady that got caught in the fire? Lord Jesus, it's a fire. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time for that. No.
Ain't nobody got time for lack of conformity. We just need to conform, man. Make life a lot easier, man. Just do what Chuck says.
The flow.
Do what OG say do. If you just do what OG say do, man, I think life gets a lot easier.
You know, as they say, just do what it do.
Do what it do.
You know.
Do what they say to do.
And you'll
do
be
what
good.
it do.
You know, just buckle up.
Yeah, buckle up, strap in.
Because it's going to be a long ride.
Get your block of cheese. Take your stimulus check. Get your
Conformity.
Jab. Conform.
Yeah. And most of us do. Most of us do conform. And actually, it's probably such a covert operation, we don't even realize the mechanisms that are prompting us to conform. And sometimes we do see it, but by force, you're going to conform.
Yeah.
And so, this is a concept, even in the Arabic, right? Muwafiq.
Yeah.
You might be the one,
Which leads to the munafiq.
It could be. Unless you're conforming.
Be careful, your muwafaqa, right, might lead to munafiqa, right? Yeah, man, we gotta watch out for that one.
So the idea of conformity, as I said, is kind of covert, and we might even think it's an acceptable process. But as believers, we want to be careful with what we're conforming to. And the idea here is that you're aligning your attitude, beliefs, your behaviors to the group or the social. You adopt social norms of the majority, and the question is, who is the majority, right? So.
Yeah.
So that's where you want to be careful. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you do have questions, it's always good, post them. We love to try and answer any questions we can as best as possible.
Questions. I ain't got no answers, man. I got a couple of bad jokes, but I ain't got no answers.
I'll conform to it. I'm a yes man. Hey, man. Yeah, that's right. That sounds good.
Remember, what was the guy's name? Michael, let me look up his name. Michael Duncan. Michael Clark Duncan. Remember, he was a dude that was in the Green Mile.
Oh yeah,
the African American brother.
Right.
He was like real big, right? Real big, big dude, right? And so like after a couple of movies, he got some popularity, and and so they were gonna do. I think it was the reboot of the Planet of the Apes movies with Mark Wahlberg.
Okay.
And so they were like, "Yo, man, we want you to be in our movie. You're gonna play like this big gorilla dude." And now he's thinking like, "How am I as a black man gonna run around dressed up as a gorilla?" He was like, "No, I can't do that."
Right.
He's like, "We'll pay you $20 million." He said he went, "Oh."
Quick, fast, and like in a hurry. Where's that suit again?
Yeah.
What do we do?
Or like, who's your man? Ernie Hudson, who played like the black Ghostbuster. Like people don't even remember. It's Winston or Stinson or whatever his name was. Right.
He drove the car, right?
So when he went to apply for it, right, they're like, "Do you believe in ghosts and astral projections and poltergeists and Ouija boards?" And he's like, "Lady, if there's a steady paycheck in it, I believe everything you say, right?" Conformity, man. It's everybody's got their price.
Their price, right? And you will conform.
But not everybody's making the same offer, right? I always say I always have a price. But you're going to have to compete with God, right? You're going to have to compete with Allah, right? Everybody's got, I have my price too, right? But what is it that Chuck is offering? What is it that society is offering? And then what is Allah Ta'ala offering? Right? What is God offering? And some of them others look pretty good, especially on a short bet, right? But, playing for the long haul.
Well, I think that's the key there is if you don't know who you are, you don't have standing, right? So as Muslims, if you don't know who you are as a Muslim and you're not well grounded in your deen and who you are in your community in regards to what God wants from you, then your price might be pretty low too.
And there's always somebody else that's happy to make up your mind for you, right? If you don't know who you are. And I feel that's one of the blessings of Islam, and one of the objectives of Islam is for you to actually figure out, who you are. Now, there's the old philosophical, adage, know thyself. Well, that sounds nice, and probably looks really nice on a placard or on a monument, know thyself. But to be honest, that can be a challenge to get to know who you are. Yeah. Especially when you're young and you come into the world. Well, who am I? And sometimes that can change, right, depending on your age and circumstances. And so Islam is a religion that does not even leave that up to question, right? That it does, it is dictatorial. This is who you ought to be. Yeah. Right. And so when we were talking, I think this idea for the topic actually came last Saturday. Right. Just, a few days ago after class when you and myself and Yahya were talking, and somehow the question of conformity, came up, and I was like, actually, I think this would make like a really interesting, episode. Yeah. And so, take us out of the...
Well, maybe we can start with, quite honestly, this has been a debated topic. The many research papers on it, and examined pretty thoroughly the idea of conformity. And so I just pulled a few, while there's many other perspectives. One would be social contract theory. And the idea here, and this was like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, several other French philosophers. So the idea here, though, is that there's a social contract and where individuals conform to societal rules, norms, beliefs, social order, and protection. Conformity is seen as something necessary, maintaining peace, cooperation within the society. And these sounds good, right? Right. I mean, man, I want peace. I want, a good society. But again, we have to reevaluate, well, what is the society projecting? What do we got to conform to achieve that peace? Right. Right. And so those are some of the questions. And again, a lot of this is covert, and by default, especially Muslims moving into a new environment, maybe you weren't born here, you feel like you should conform. Hey, it's for the greater of the good, and it doesn't seem like it's harming anything. Right. I mean, what's the problem here? Until it's at your front doorstep, and they're kind of trying to coerce your children into something that it doesn't fit with you. So those are some of the things we got to think about, is this social contract and what are we bowing down to, conforming to. Another one is the individualism versus collectivism. And this idea is where the thinkers emphasize the importance of individual liberty and thus warned against tyranny of the majority. Where societal pressures to conform can suppress individual expression and innovation. So almost with the social contract theory, we give up, if we agree to this, we kind of give up a right over here. Yes. Sometimes, right? So the government says, hey, let us do this. We say, okay, because it'll be safer for you, okay. Yeah. But you're going to give up this without knowing, right?
And I think no matter what you do, and I think that was one of the things that we had said, like in a sort of twist of irony, it's, people that kind of make a virtue out of rebellion, which they sort of non-conformity as rebellion, where they make a virtue out of rebelling against one kind of form of because what is sometimes referred to as tyranny, and not that things can't be tyrannical, but I think in the modern context, like everything is viewed as tyranny, and this has come from the postmodernists, undoubtedly. And so, some of this episode is going to harken back to the last couple that we.
Those guys are
about.
everywhere, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, these theories are really prevalent
Right.
and ubiquitous in our time, and so. Because of European academics like Michel Foucault and others, and even those that preceded them, like Marx and many of the post-Marx philosophers, right, the European philosophers, they looked at the world through the prism of power.
Right.
And so they tend to look at any manifestation of power as tyrannical. And then you can even, in some ways, you can substitute, power for tradition, right? And I think that'll be something important to lump into this. So, they're rebelling against tradition, and they're rebelling against what they perceive to be power. And yet, not only are they, in many ways, consciously or subconsciously, trying to simply subvert and usurp that power for their own power.
Right.
Right? That's important. That's one of it. That in many ways, a lot of the impetus for them having this clarion call to rebel against this or that is because they're looking for some type of emancipation or whatnot. But ironically, they tend to find out in the end, well, the only way to counter power is to actually have some power of your own.
Right.
So then it comes to be really about, well, whose power? And so, like you think about, there's certain verses in the Quran. Like you take a passage in the 63rd chapter, Surah Al-Munafiqun, right? It's funny, we just got through mentioning hypocrites, right? So there's a chapter in the Quran titled The Hypocrites, Al-Munafiqun. And there's one passage, but with two parts in it towards the end, where Allah talks about the hypocrites, and that they are in some ways rebelling against this rising power structure of the Muslims. So the Muslims are growing because here's the thing, like a quick tangent, right? The munafiqun, right? The hypocrites, in terms of on the timeline of Islam, right? So the revelation of the Quran begins with the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca and ends, right, with the passing of the Prophet in Medina, alayhi salam, right? In the Meccan period, in those first 12, 13 years, there's really no munafiqeen.
Right.
There's no hypocrites, because there's no power structure either to try to usurp or overthrow or co-opt. So we don't really have hypocrisy. What we have in the first part of that is really you could say either tyranny, like certainly people are abusing other people,
Right.
or we also have hedonism, right? People just doing crazy godless acts of this or that. Once though the Muslims make the move to Medina and the Prophet ﷺ establishes his own power structure there, even though they did not by any means in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ take over Yathrib, which became eventually to be known as Medinatul Nabi or Medina. They didn't take it over, but they did establish their power structure, and they began to grow.
Right.
So the former people of power structure, particularly, right, in Mecca being the Quraysh, right, and then in Yathrib, of course, the Jews,
Right.
they start going, well, who are these new kids on the block
Yeah.
that are usurping our authority? And so they start saying things like, هم الذين يقولون لا تنفقوا على من عند رسول الله حتى ينفضوا. And so they say things like, don't spend any money in the way of the Messenger of Allah until it really shows that they're going to win or they're going to be successful or whatnot. And Allah's response to them is, وَلِلَّهِ خَزَائِنُ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلَكِنَ الْمُنَافِقِينَ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. And so Allah Ta'ala responds to the hypocrites by saying, but to God belongs all of the storehouses of treasure. All wealth essentially belongs to God, right? Everything valuable belongs to Him. The issue is that what? The hypocrites, they just don't comprehend this.
Right.
You know, وَلَكِنَ الْمُنَافِقِينَ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. They don't get it. They don't comprehend it. And so I worry about Muslims in particular in the modern context who have been influenced by Foucaultian, dialectics on power and politics, and that everything that has power is evil. So, for instance, when it comes to the whole colonialism thing, which is a real issue and has undoubtedly committed atrocities, and therefore now the decolonial movement, both as a political movement and as an academic movement, that they very much demonize power. But ironically, the only way, think about it, right? And we talked about this Saturday. This is part of our conversation. What's happening in Palestine would not have happened under the Ottoman Empire. And I don't say that as a romantic about the Ottoman Empire, right? The Ottoman Empire had its faults and had corruption and all kinds of things. But it was also the last place, it was the last power entity in the world that gave the Muslims a sense of belonging and rootedness. And that's why the enemies of Islam worked night and day to eventually, chip away at it and dislodge it from its seat of power.
Yeah.
And so one of the other things that we'll have to talk about is that in this, critique of power and non-conformity and whatnot, is that it's quite ironic in that the thing that you're looking to avail yourself of, the only way you can do that is actually having some power of your own.
Yeah.
So it's really about choosing, like we said in the end, it's like you got to pick and choose your conformity. Don't be like the 1955 movie, right? Rebel without a cause. You need, and even then, for us, we don't have any concept of rebellion. Rebellion, from the Muslim point of view, is something that is seen as sinful.
Right.
Jihad is seen as an act of worship and even compulsory under certain circumstances, and is not the same as rebellion.
Right.
And that's why there is, people can like it or not, but there are strictures placed around Muslims rebelling against their rulers. Now, I'm not going to go to certain groups that almost make it like it's completely off the table. But at the same time, you don't just rebel against your Muslim leaders.
Yeah, there's a protocol.
There's a protocol, exactly. Anyway,
No, the key thing too, I think a key word that has reemerged, throughout 80s, 90s, was that term anarchist. And we're not anarchists. Muslims are not anarchists.
Not at all.
We will go through major links to ensure that the power structure that we do have remains intact without, some civil war.
Right.
This is more important. I think Imam Malik had mentioned, I rather live under kind of this tyranny, I'm probably paraphrasing completely wrong, than go into anarchy where everything is just upheaval and there is no peace now. We're all at,
the Quran says, وَالْفِتْنَةُ أَشَدُّ مِنَ الْقَتْلِ, right? That having certain kinds of trials and tribulations, which can most certainly be of the political nature, and that actually is very much in congruence with the conditions around what that, verse was revealed to deal with, undoubtedly illustrates that, being killed while egregious is not the most egregious thing, right? That what is even more egregious is the dissolution of society.
Yeah, the fitna is like...
Yeah, so وَالْفِتْنَةُ أَشَدُّ مِنَ الْقَتْلِ. That's a real thing.
Yeah. So, again, some of the other concepts of the West when it comes to conformity is critical theory. And this is a critique of the conformity in capitalist societies. And so they argue that the mass culture of consumerism leads to a passive acceptance of status quo. So diminishing critical thinking in and of itself, like almost where we're at today, like nobody's really critical thinking. We just conform. Where's my devices?
Like and subscribe is just
like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe
Right.
in many ways has become the new vernacular.
Yeah.
To the collapse of critical thinking, right? Just like and subscribe. There's no even, I mean, a lot of times, it's hard to even find like the dislike button. And even those are reduced. Like there's no dialectic anymore. There's no nuance anymore. I'm either left with a binary, which is, I think, not ironic in the digital age, right? Between ones and zeros. I can either like what you say or dislike what you say. I cannot have a conversation with you.
Right.
I cannot say, well, maybe there's some parts of what you say I agree with and other parts I disagree with. Chris Hedges was just asked the other day about, somebody said, hey, I saw that you said something about Candace Owens, right? Who is this, you could say more of a religious right person, not always politically right, because actually Candace Owens, in many ways, has actually come out to be almost totally in support of the Palestinian cause and completely against the Zionist Israeli genocide of the Palestinians, which has really ticked off a lot of her, you could say, conformist right-wing followers that were like, oh, I thought she was one of us, and we're all just, on the whole Israeli tip. And she's like, no, she's like, I'm a Catholic. Right? She's saying her, right? I'm a Catholic. There's no way I can condone the mass slaughtering of children and innocents somehow and square that with my belief in Jesus. Like that absolutely is irreconcilable. And so Chris Hedges, right, who's this, investigative reporter and certainly left-leaning, some people were like, hey, man, it seemed like you were almost like condoning and shaking hands with Candace Owens. He's like, look, there's lots of people, and I'm not a big Chris Hedges fan in terms of like, I disagree with a lot of his take on many things, but it was worth mentioning that he's like, hey, look, like most people I'm not going to agree with, lock, stock, and barrel on everything. Yeah. But when it comes to this atrocity in Palestine, if I can make or shake hands or make some temporary alignment that in no way furthers the rest of that agenda. So you said you take a Candace Owens, like she's all about a whole cadre of things that I don't want to further and I don't agree with. And I'm not going to align with her to the point that I further those or give any credence to them. But if she's right on this issue of Palestine, and I am, well then to what extent we work together to further that which will aid and assist, the Palestinians, I will do, and the other stuff I will still be just as critical and disagree with. You don't find this anymore. Yeah. Everything has become, partisan and a binary of partisan. Like there's no even nuance. I mean, I was sharing something on Twitter the other day about a book. Actually, I have it here because I was like, man, I buy so many books now. I don't even know how they come into my possession. No, seriously. So this book, I think I bought. There's a bookseller overseas, I think in Saudi Arabia, and so anyway, I bought something from them, and it was one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, it's like, hey, do you also want to get this one? And that like the algorithmic suggestions at the bottom. So I think I just clicked everything. And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, if already cost me 3 times the books to ship them, sure, what's another paperback? Throw it in there, right? So it was this book that I was interested in about the introduction to the science of hadith, right? So anybody that is interested, right? So anyway, I forgot that I had even got this book. So I stumbled across it the other day, and I was like, oh yeah, that's this book that at the end of it contains this work by Sheikh Muhammad al-Kawthari, who is this like Circassian from the Caucasus Mountains, this guy who was like a sort of important late 19th, 20th century figure, comes out of that. He actually lived in the Ottoman Empire for a while and then had to flee the Ottoman Empire because of the Ataturk regime that cracked down on the Muslims and so on. So anyway, long story short, I think I shared this on Twitter, and I was like, yeah, this is like I wanted to read his work because I'm curious his approach to teaching the science of hadith and whatnot.
Okay.
And they're like, somebody on Twitter was like, I thought you were an Athari, man. Why are you reading this guy who's like a Hanafi, Maturidi, Sufi, and you're an Athari, Maliki, I'm like, wow, man. Like, I'm curious what the guy has to say and what was his educational, pedagogical approach to teaching. Like, it doesn't mean that I agree that I'm suddenly now a Hanafi or a Maturidi or what. Like, what happened to, right? This is what I mean about this rebellious attitude. It's more than just simply rebelling against power structures. It's also what I'll talk a little bit about, like what Paul Vitz talks about. It disintegrates society.
Yeah.
So you can't even
yeah.
Wow.
And again, being well grounded in your deen, you will default back to particular ayat we've conformed to. Unity is fard.
Yeah.
Just default right back to that, and let's hear out what some of these people have to say, our brothers and sisters, and then okay, and then we might critique it a little bit, and like these non-Muslims are saying, well, I can stand with that, but some other things, I can't hang with, but that's fine.
Right.
We still can unite to a certain degree here and there, whatever, right? But yeah, you're right. So the idea of one of the second parts here we mentioned in critical theory was that this diminishing critical thinking and individuality. So Islam merges those very easily, right? And when we conform to its precincts, then things merge very easily. They can be reconciled very easily. Another one was the existentialism, and the idea here is that they're critiquing conformity in a way that people may be avoiding personal responsibility and the burden of creating one's own value and meaning in life. So when you just conform, you let somebody else drive. There's this, you got your co-pilot driving now. You just put that.
The self-driving.
so you don't, you can blame the car. Well, I don't know how it wrecked. That
Elon's
thing
got you all taken care of, bro. He's got the self-driving joint.
Know what happened here, right? Instead of the importance of being, authentic and having your own self-individualism. So instead of just binary, we like, not like, and that's all you got.
I do think it's not ironic that we find the prevalence of binary thinking in the digital age, right? I mean, I don't
Ones
think
and zeros.
Everything is like a 1 or a 0. You can check a box. I mean, obviously there's some things that are true and false, but to reduce all conversation to a 1 or a 0 is super problematic.
It's problematic, big time. The last idea here was social psychology, and there was two famous studies. Maybe our audience will be familiar with. Was the Ash study, which was he put people in a row, and they would see these sticks or these images of lines, and the idea was that the group would say, the scientists would say, so which ones do you find higher? Well, number one. Well, actually, it wasn't, right? It was lower.
Yeah.
But the whole group is saying except one. And he's like, no, I know that's not right. But he felt the pressure of just saying, number one. Right? So are we under the Ash experiment, right, by certain authorities we don't even know, and we're conforming to certain things very covertly?
That's spraying. I'm sure we're under some ashes.
Not vicariously and directly. So that was one of them. The other one was the study conducted where participants were electrocuting. They couldn't see the other individual,
That's insane.
but there was an authority. The authority was there saying, hey, turn up the notch, irregardless of what you might be hearing. Just keep turning up the notch as I instruct you. Don't worry about it, right? So, they couldn't see the participants, so he's turning up this fake dial, but he's turning, please turn it down, please. And the guy would look up to the sign, he goes, man, he goes, just Don't worry.
Yes.
Right? So
Just keep turning, man.
So, and we talked about, like, so Germany was all about, well, I was just doing what I was told,
Yes,
right? And no
yes.
responsibility.
I told you the joke, right? I had a German friend of mine. He said, there was a joke in Germany that, like, everybody was just following orders to the point that nobody ever gave the order,
I don't know. I was just taking orders, right? And we get that today even with our own police.
Yes.
Like, what... I was following orders. I had to beat him. What do you mean you had to? Not to death. What are you talking about, right? So, there's this, you disassociate any responsibility because, hey, so these two famous studies had shown the psychology of conformity and how powerful that might be when you're up against an authority or you're up against a group, the group mentality, right?
Right.
And so we need to discover, are we conforming when we're in school to the group? Are we conforming to the professor, to our boss, to whatever, wherever we're at? And if we're not well grounded as Muslims, as believers, then we might fall victim to some serious issues, right? Or even,
or like to the point where you're disobeying Allah. I mean, there's the passage in the 45th chapter, Surah Al-Jathiyah, and it begins by Allah talking about Bani Israel. So it talks about the Israelites. وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ. And we gave Bani Israel all of this, right? النبوة والحكم, and this, and we gave them prophethood and books, and وَآتَيْنَاهُمْ بَيِّنَاتٍ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ, and we gave them clear, directives to follow, but they didn't begin to differ until knowledge came to them and caused all these problems. So then he sort of describes it describes all of Bani Israel like from a 40,000 foot view, right? They were sent messengers, clear instructions, this and that. They were blessed by God, on and on and on. And then they messed it all up. Then he tells the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ. He said, however, we have put you upon a particular sharia. We have put you on a particular way. فَاتَّبِعْهَا. Follow it. وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. And do not follow the way of those that are simply following their desires. A lot of rebellion, a lot of non-conformity is actually people just following their ahwa, what the Quran refers to, their whims, their passions, their desires. In Islam, when we disobey something, we are disobeying it because, one, it is in contradistinction, or it is incongruent with our imperatives from our own religion, right? So it's something that is against Islam, like eat a ham sandwich, have a drink of wine, gamble, usury, you name it. So, but that's just one part of it. We do reject those or do not conform with those, but we take it a step further than to indulge what Allah Ta'ala has made that is halal and good and permissible from that. So it's not enough. And I think that's where Vitz talks about, he has a term that he refers to as, what does he call it? Yeah, morbid modernism. He said, a lot of the postmodernist, deconstructionists, these thinkers that, again, like I said about your man, Baudrillard, smart, interesting observations, but their conclusions are absolute garbage. So they have all these great observations, like Michel Foucault. Some of his observations were quite interesting. He also was into pederasty, and that's a whole other thing. But, he did have some interesting insights about power, but his conclusions about power were absolute trash.
Right.
That, in my opinion, leads to, and I agree with Vitz, who, by the way, he's a Catholic PhD. He's a Catholic intellectual. So he writes about, he's like a kind of like a cultural critic and whatnot. Really brilliant guy. I mean, Allah guide him. He's really something else. And I've really enjoyed his works, and we've read some of his works a few times here in classes. But he says that, because postmodernism is primarily a critical and sometimes even nihilistic movement, he says, I have often referred to postmodernism as morbid modernism.
Yeah.
right? It's a modernism in contradistinction to postmodernism. Modernism about what? Tradition. It's about culture and tradition. So postmodernism, and what Vitz is saying is actually recreating its own new tradition of being morbid about everything.
Yeah.
And ultimately doesn't build anything.
Right.
It only can deconstruct. It can only tear apart. It doesn't put anything together, which leads to, I think, a depressed spirit. So for us as Muslims, while Allah Ta'ala has forbidden usury, riba, Allah has forbidden usury, but He has made, as the Quran has said, He has made a halal bay', right? He's made buying and selling, He's made business halal, meaning that that's what we should do. We don't just say, oh, well, because of the usury or something, well, we're just going to be broke and poor. And no, we have to use our blessings of God that has given us to create positive outlets and ways to build something, right? So we shouldn't feel trapped. So again, I don't really feel like we should be rebels.
Right.
Rebellion is not something that is a characteristic or a virtue in Islam. What's a virtue in Islam is when it is called upon, is jihad, is to struggle and to fight against tyranny, injustice, and those kinds of things, if that's what's warranted.
Yeah.
But just rebelling for the sake of rebelling is also, I think, kind of juvenile. But I do think there's a potential that Muslims are falling into this trap where now even the attitude of many Muslims in the modern age towards like scholars, they like want to rebel against the scholars.
Right.
This is a really disturbing trend.
Yeah. And, simply put, the concept of conformity in Islam is just the basic that you're going to conform to the 5 pillars of Islam. Goes more than that, but in a general context,
of course,
it's like,
you will conform to the ahkam of Allah. Like you will conform to what Allah Ta'ala, what God has commanded and prohibited, but you will also conform to the community, because the primary voice that Allah speaks to the human being in is the voice of the plural, the voice of the collective.
Right.
So, you can take that rebellious attitude to a kind of absurdity where you are no longer even part of a collective.
Right.
And that's what Vitz talks about. It's like, it really gets to the point where it's just hyper deconstructionist.
Yeah. Well, one point, when we, as a tangent here, I wanted to bring up, because I think some people get shy of certain buzzwords, but they're not buzzwords, but they become buzzwords within, Western media, in particular the news, and the idea of Sharia and Sharia law. And so, I'll hear a lot of people in America.
When I hear Sharia, I get happy.
They're like, and we should, But you'll find Muslims shy away. Oh, Sharia law, because you've heard so much that Muslims they're gonna put Sharia law on us, and like we said, they might like it if they knew what it really was. And I think sometimes Muslims forget what it is or really don't know.
I know. So I get like C.C. Peniston, man. I'm like, finally. When I hear about Sharia, man. Yeah.
And so there's 5, right? Concepts or aspects to Sharia law in general.
What's number 1? Give me number 1, man.
I just think of one.
Okay, give me one. Give me something.
It protects your deen.
Yeah, hifz
It
al-deen.
protects religion.
Right.
But it protects religion, but everybody's religion. If it's right.
Yeah, this is where I think that there's the misunderstanding by a great many non-Muslims, because they tend to take their knowledge of Islam from things like Fox News or even Wikipedia, which is obviously highly dominated by sort of a left-leaning attitude. I made this little video the other day after the whole the super transgender gay Paris Olympics catastrophe. That, by the way, featured a man painted in blue with his testicles hanging out in the presence of a young girl, a minor. So anyway, when this came out, and it was like a mockery of the Last Supper, many conservative Christians got outraged by this. right? And they're like, oh, look at how they're making a mockery of our religion, and so I was like, you know what? I'm not really having a lot of sympathy for y'all right now. And the reason being is that, all of these years, especially let's say post 9/11, but even preceding it, but especially post 9/11, all we have been told about in terms of the American populace, coming from them, is how Sharia is going to be a threat to America, and we have to ban Sharia law, and Sharia, Mon Sharia. Like, I thought we were going to make a new Stevie Wonder song from Mon Sharia, like, Sharia. I mean, it got to this, kind of foaming at the mouth.
Right.
Sharia. The irony is that all of that fear-mongering by their leaders that were teaching them to conform to a certain point of view, who actually comes out to be the greatest threat against their beliefs as Christians? Some of their own,
fringe.
Well, to be honest, they come out of Christianity.
Yeah.
So it wasn't people coming from the Muslim world. It's people coming from Europe, the heart of Christendom and post-Christendom. They're the ones that made a mockery of your religion. In fact, in Sharia, what that guy did, that Thomas Jolly, right, the French gay Jewish Zionist guy that was the art director for that whole thing. In Islam, it would be forbidden, not only because we revere Sayyidina Isa, right, we revere Jesus, the son of Mary, and his mother. We love them and respect them and revere them, but also we are commanded to not be disrespectful to other people's religions.
Right.
And so, even though, as I said in my video, don't twist it. I'm not trying to be sneaky here. No, Islam will never promote Christianity. We'll never promote Catholicism. Right. It'll never promote Buddhism or any other ism, because for us, we believe in the exclusivity of Islam as a guiding path.
Right.
And so I can never promote another religion. Islam will never promote another religion. But, and now talking about the Sharia, it does accommodate for people to have their religious practices. And the proof is in the pudding. This is not just me pie in the sky talking. Go into our own books. Go into our own books of fiqh, of Islamic jurisprudence, going back over the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of which, even when Muslims came in and dominated some parts of the Byzantine Empire, which is, they're all Christian. Yes, many people converted to Islam, and those that didn't, did we forbid people to practice the religion? I remember one of my teachers was showing us some case studies of the actual Mahkama Islamiyya, like of an Islamic court, but he was during the time of Andalus. And the faqih, right, the qadi, the judge, had made adjudicated a case where a man he was Muslim, but his mother was a Christian. Because this is the reality. I mean, everybody thinks that conversion only happened conversion only happened either recently or with the Sahaba, and in between then everybody was Muslim. No, there's always been a constant process of conversion right over the centuries. So here was a guy he was Muslim, but his mother was a Christian, and she was elderly. And he ruled that her son, as a Muslim, had to not only provide her accommodations to go to church on Sundays, like transportation and whatnot, but that if she were to want to tithe, because part of their religion is Christians, right, they tithe when they go to church.
Giving money.
That he would have to give her the money to tithe at church.
Yeah. Interesting.
I mean, so, unfortunately, just to be blunt, a lot of conservative Christians are just ignoramuses when it comes to learning about Islam. And that, I'm not saying you have to like Islam, agree with Islam, become a Muslim, right? That's between you and Allah. But at least learn the facts. Even after all that, you say, nope, I reject Islam, I don't like Islam. Well, okay, fine, whatever. But most of them are operating under such a deluge of ignorance that the great irony is that look at who wound up makes an absolute, they talk about on the global stage, because they didn't embarrass the Jews. They didn't do that to Judaism. They didn't even do it to Islam. And this is in France, right? They didn't do it to Islam. They didn't do it to the Buddhists. They didn't do it to the Hindus. They did it to the Christians.
Right.
And so all this time you've been fixated and been told to be fixated and conforming to the standard ideology of those who are really just wanting to use you as a means to ascend to power. Focus on the Muslims. Be terrified of the Muslims. Everything is about right.
Yeah.
And then here, like to me, I was like, no, I ain't got no sympathy for y'all.
No. Yeah. Well, and the big thing was they're going to put your women in this, burqa or something. I mean, just way out. No, it doesn't even matter type
insane.
of stuff.
Absolutely insane.
Another thing, it protects life, protects intellect, lineage, and property.
Yes.
So these are the last four. And these become very significant where, intellectual property.
Yes.
Right. So part of our conformity to the Western concepts of all aspects of life start to diminish a lot of your intellect. And we just tapped in it, we spoke a lot about that, but part of Islam is protecting that intellect. And another thing I found very interesting when I became Muslim is lineage. Like we don't even think about that in the West. Like lineage, what's the big deal about that? Yeah, I came from my mom, my dad. This is my last name, whatever. But it doesn't matter, right? Over here, make a baby from here. This guy, this girl, this and that.
Right.
And, the name and the bloodline. And who cares?
Right.
No big deal. No, Islam protects all of that, and is heavily mandated on making sure we know who's who. You know who you are and where you came from becomes very important.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. We've become, I think, so accustomed in the modern day and age of like, well, I'm, my parents are my lineage, and it pretty much stops there. Like grandma and grandpa, maybe, it's not, but you don't think of yourself as this, obviously how old is humanity? No, I don't know what, hundreds of thousands, millions of years old or whatnot. Obviously, like I'm the descendant of an incredibly long line.
Right.
Tragically, I can only go back, like in my case particularly, like
3 or 4 generations.
If you go back to almost every one of my grandparents, anything beyond them is really murky.
Yeah.
Like 2 of my grandfathers, both my maternal and paternal grandfather, were adopted. Or in the case of my dad's father, he was adopted. My mother's father was a product of an out of wedlock relationship. Yeah. So, and so he never knew who his father was.
Yeah.
And in the case of both of my grandfathers, it was like such a shame you don't talk about it. I remember as a little kid, this is weird, like my dad's dad, right? My paternal grandfather, he looked Asian. He did.
Interesting.
And so I remember one time when I was like maybe 5 years old, right? Because they say kids say the strangest things. I remember looking at my grandfather like, Papa Charles, where are you from? Because he just looked different. Like he looked like this Asian cat. Even when he was in the hospital dying of cancer, his doctor was actually Korean. And he was like, oh, you're Asian too. He was like, what? He was like, well, I'm black from Atlanta, right? And so I remember when I asked my grandfather, like, Papa Charles, where are you from? And he got real quiet. And then he started to cry. And I was like, oh, man. And then he was like, I don't know. And then my dad was like, okay, we got to go. And it was like, you just didn't. So the hefta nasl, right, that idea of the, the preserving of your lineage. And when I look at many of the people in my family that across both sides of the maternal and paternal side of my family, there's a lot of psychological and emotional scarring of not knowing who you are and where you come from. And that led to all kinds of dysfunctional and abusive behaviors, alcoholism and, infidelity and other things, right?
Yeah. No, that's important.
No, it's massively important. That goes way beyond, they're going to make you wear a burqa, right? It goes way beyond that. Why is it that Islam is a religion that is concerned with sexual fidelity on an individual, familial, and social level? Why?
There's a lot of social ills that will spawn from that, as you mentioned, whether that's psychological or so on and so forth, criminal. But, the interesting thing people might not recognize is that within the Gulf region, there's families that can take their line all the way back up to the Sahaba or, within the Quraysh, whatever it might be. And we would think, oh, that's so distant. Like that realm of people are gone. We don't know. No. Over there, they can take their whole nasl or their whole family line.
Man, they go back and go back and go back and go back. And
right.
Go back.
It's very
and
interesting.
it's not for like fakhara. It's not for bragging.
Right.
Right. But there's a real there's a sense of rootedness and belongingness and pride that comes, and also like the kind of beneficial expectations that's placed on a person of like, hey man, you come from a line of X, Y, and Z, like don't screw up.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So again, these ideas here. One last thing in regards to the intellect, The obvious is, of course, not taking drugs, not alcohol, because you'll lose your akal, you'll lose your intellect, right? And so, but are we drowned out with all these other ancillary distractions that wreck the mind, so to speak? And those are some, right? So those are, knowledge that doesn't even benefit. We're so consumed with, other people's lives and what they do, and these celebrities. I think you mentioned like wasting time with celebrities who actually turn against you in the
That's
in
what
the
I just
end
said
of
the other day about this guy Owen Benjamin. Right. He's one of these red-pilled cats, and they were like, yeah, he's talking about the Zionists. He's on our team. Then he comes out, he's like, I don't know why these Palestinians are making such a big deal about their olive trees, and they should just all pack up and move. They lost, and it's it. Yeah. And it's like then the Muslims got hurt, their feelings got hurt. I'm like, stop investing in these people. They are all, as Allah says, كأنهم خشب مسندة. They're just like pieces of wood. They're fake. They're fake and unreliable.
Yeah. So, protecting our intellect, and conforming to Sharia is not a bad thing. This is not the, this bad word that they've impressed on us. It's a good thing, and we should be conforming to it, and we should study it more to understand it. So, as Muslims, we should be able to respond appropriately to those who are. I mean,
they're both in the Jewish and in the Christian context, that when they lived under Muslim rulership throughout many long swaths of history, that they greatly prospered.
Yeah.
Right. The Jews, the Sephardic Jews, right, the Jews that lived like in North Africa and the Levant, right, in that area, like Hashem and whatnot, they greatly prospered. They greatly prospered living with the Muslims. Way more than when they were in Europe with the Christians.
Persecuted, yeah.
Oh, are you kidding me, right?
So,
and indeed, look at the Christians that also lived amongst that lived amongst the Muslims. They also did very, very well. I mean, that's why I find it such a great irony of people like, even though I talk about celebrities, but just as an example of why you shouldn't, is that you take people like Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld, right? I mean, his grandparents were from Ottoman Syria. They were Jews living in Ottoman Syria. And I think his dad's or his grandfather's name was something like Kamal Feinstein or whatever his name was. Like he had an Arabized name and then like a Jewish last name or something like that. And they did very well as like textile merchants.
Yeah.
Living amongst the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't until y'all try to go to freaking Germany and Russia, and then they really stuck it to you. You did very, very well with the Muslims.
Yeah. No, these are.
But this rebellious thing, man, I think we really, again, there needs to be a sharp distinction between, it's true, as Muslims, there is a directive in our religion of which we are to be non-conformist with those things that are contradictory either to a moral principle in Islam or some other type of, like worship or something like that. But we do not extrapolate that out to a default disposition of being rebellious.
Right.
No, that is unacceptable.
Right. That's right.
I really like, Vid's talked a lot about that. He said, for instance, like, in some ways, if you were to characterize, and I think this is what you'll find with those that have this kind of just default cynical attitude of being rebellious, is that there's an aspect of postmodern thought that is style over substance. You know, so that's why, you know, they have literally made it a fashion style to be a rebel, right? You got your jean jacket and you got the pants with the holes ripped in them. I remember one day my daughter came to the house.
Fashion rebel.
Yeah, you're a fashion rebel. My daughter came to the house and she had some jeans with some holes in them. And she was like, "Hey, Dad, look at my jeans." I'm like, "Child, why you got some clothes with some holes in them?" No, take them stupid things off. "Yeah, but these are cool." "Why are they cool?" And when I asked her that, like, you tell me in your own words why they're cool. And she could not tell me.
Right.
So she would took them off. Right. And that conformity, right? I think this is important for especially Muslim women living in the West that are always worried about conforming to standards of beauty. I mean, one of the default standards of so-called beauty for women in the West is men have an entitlement to your physical beauty publicly. So that's why, you know, like you watch the news, which I don't, but, you know, when you watch the news, the dude is in a suit.
Right.
My man is like all the way up to here, right? Just, you know, he's all in a suit and tie. All the way down, shoes, everything. The woman, she's constantly shifting because she's about to expose her private parts between her legs. Like she's always shifting in the chair like this. Then she's got the cleavage. Then she's got the sleeveless. She's got nothing on the back. And it's like, are you like, why is it that they have this sense of entitlement that men get to see other women's beauty, and then women translate that into, I am going to reveal my beauty, and I'm not going to be told by any fuddy-duddy, any old traditional, no, I'm going to emancipate myself.
Right.
But that's like my man's movie Inception. Somebody put that idea in your head.
Oh, yeah.
That's not your idea.
Time ago.
You have the title and the deed to that idea is sitting in a vault somewhere, and it's definitely not sitting in your head.
Yeah. No, it's true. And don't even get to the weather woman.
Oh,
So,
man.
No. So the conformity factor here, you know, and I was only doing what I was told. The boss, you know, I needed whatever it might be. Women are compromised and then led to believe that this is a form of liberation and I have the freedom to express myself how I want. No, actually, we've kind of self-imposed what we want, and then you've conformed to it, feeling that,
that's the new conformity. I mean, this is the irony of it, is that it claims to be anti-establishment and anti-conformity, but then it will be extraordinarily puritanical in you now conforming to its directive, its prime directive of to be non-conformity, right? So the only way that you can really be a free woman is to reveal yourself.
Yeah, right.
Right? And so every attempt to be non-conformist always results in a new conformity.
Right.
But they will try to make you believe that 1 + 1 + 1 is 1. Although I don't know, man. Terrence Howard, so he might
He's
disagree.
The best nonconformist, man.
But yeah, they will sit there and try to tell you that that's what the math is,
right?
And if you don't agree to that, then your whole value as a human being is now completely suspect.
Definitely.
You know, so yeah, I think Muslims need to spend more time getting to, like I said, getting to know yourself. All this idea of know thyself. Well, like I said, know thyself sounds nice on a fortune cookie or on a card or on a T-shirt, but the process of getting to know who you are, and more importantly, who you ought to be. That's a big difference between Islam, and I would even say most other revealed religions, is that they don't stop at know thyself as if the self is just an empty repository of you to take full creative license, tabula rasa, and you paint that picture however you want. No, there's some instructions that come, there's some lines that are drawn, and there's a pre-selected palette, right, that is there. Now, not in Islam, I would say that we definitely have a difference between unity and uniformity, right? That there is a spectrum, but there's a limit to that as well. And so Islam is dualistic in that, yes, you should know yourself, but the process of that discovery of who you are is not entirely left up to you.
Right.
It is also partially dictatorial. Who are you? You are created by Allah. You were created with a purpose, and that purpose is to worship Him. And worship is specific. It is not, ironically, agnostic. You can just worship however you feel. You can, but Allah is under no obligation to accept that from you.
Right.
Right. So again, the process of self-discovery is not, at least as a in Islam as a Muslim, is not a completely open book.
Right. No, there's a balance. There's a balance of the individual and the collective interest under the parameters of, the precincts of Allah's book and His messenger. And so we're under this fallacy of, well, I'm an individual, the
Which you
individualistic society. I can do what I want as long as I'm not hurting no one, And so, no, it doesn't work that way. And the discovery of self, I would say, and add also the interests of the community. So what do we got? We're connected, and we should be connected as Muslims. So what do I got to do for myself and the community?
Yes.
And we don't see that in the West. But so that's what we need to conform to.
Yes. So, inshallah. Well, I think we touched on all of the important parts here.
Yeah.
Are we good to take us out here?
Yeah. We got to go. Just press the like, because you only have 2 buttons.
That's it. Like and subscribe, people. Like and subscribe.
Or don't.
Like and subscribe. All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.